Hello, and welcome back to Critical and Curious, Season 2, Keanu's. Today, we will be talking about supernatural Keanu, specifically Constantine from 2005 and The Day the Earth Stood Still from 2008. As always, we are coming to you from the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications here at Syracuse University. I am Charisse Lepre, and I am joined by Bob Thompson. Hey, Bob.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing very good.
I am excited. I'm not going to lie. I'm excited to talk about Constantine. It is hands down one of my favorite movies. I'm also excited to talk about The Day the Earth Stood Still, which, although both of them are remakes of prior content, so Constantine was a comic book, and The Day the Earth Stood Still was a short sci-fi story, and then a film from 1951. I think that they are, especially Constantine, is one of Keanu's strongest roles. I realized as I was watching it again for the umpteenth time, anytime somebody tells me that Keanu Reeves is not a good actor, I want to turn around and ask them, have you seen Constantine? Not necessarily because it's this epic film or, he plays a character that's so robust we can't process or whatever else Meryl Streep gets lauded for, but rather everything he does fits so perfectly into this story. Less so, I feel, with The Day the Earth Stood Still, but we'll get to that. So before we even begin, how did you enjoy watching these films?
I'm not a big fan of filmic adaptations of comic books, which means I'm living in trying times because there are so many of them, and some of our most exciting filmmaking is based upon these various comic universes, as they call them. But if you didn't know this was based on DC Comics, Hellblazer, this does not come off like a comic book adaptation at all. I mean, this the whole cancer business and his chain smoking and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it has its moments, but this doesn't have that kind of, you expect somebody to come out in tights sort of feel to it. And I liked it for that.
We are living through the era of comic reboots. So I was actually curious about when that really started. And we see a big push towards the end of the aughts. There are few from, barring Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, which are the big three over and over again through the 20th century. There's a cluster through the 90s, Judge Dredd, Men in Black, Mystery Men, Punisher, Rocketeer, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But
I'm glad you counted that among them, by the way.
Absolutely. But I think that Constantine is really at the cusp of the cluster of the era that we are in right now. On that note, I am also a big fan of The Crow from whatever that is, 1994 with Brandon Lee. And in both of those, I'm not a big comic book reader, but I came to them without the baggage of expecting something from the prior narrative, from the prior content. And I enjoyed this thoroughly. I think I didn't even know that this was a comic book until I watched it this time. Having said that, watching it through these lenses, the silhouettes are very comic, right? The way, or graphic novel, if you will, the way much of it is framed, the black and white and reds of the film, much like The Crow, where it's embracing this stylistic quality, this noir comic quality without being too on the nose. And I appreciated that.
Yes. First of all, that is interesting because you're right. Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, they go back to television animated things, serials back in the black and white TV shows with Superman. But with the exception of that trinity, there wasn't a whole lot of things going on. And the 21st century really does mark the absolute explosion of that. And for good reason, because when you think about it, of all of the media that film is got most in common with, one could argue that the comic book is it. Yeah. The stage takes place in one place. It's very artificial. It depends, so dependent upon dialogue. It's in an interior, a single interior for that matter. But the comic book is essentially a storyboard. It's what people, before they make a movie, they draw frames and what it's going to look like. So you've already established a color scheme if the comic book is in color, which they're not all. You've established a stylistic sort of thing. So I was dissing earlier how many of these films we've now got coming out from comic books, but it makes sense. They are, in many ways, a graphic novel. A comic is a dress rehearsal. It is, in many ways, a storyboard for what's potentially going to be the movie adaptation. Oftentimes, the movie adaptation may disappoint us, but I think oftentimes that is not the case. I, like you, I think I'd heard that this was a comic, but I hadn't read it when I first saw Constantine. I have subsequently gone back and read it, and I see some of the parallels that you're talking about. However, I think the filmic manifestation of this story is significantly more interesting, complex, and emotionally engaging than the comic manifestation.
It's worthwhile to note that, the comic the movie is inspired by the comic, but there are a lot of changes, right? The original comic features a blonde Brit who is written to look like Sting from Liverpool. Meanwhile, Constantine is set in Los Angeles, and we have the dark physicality of Keanu Reeves.
And the title change, I think, was important. The comic, I think, was called Constantine the Hellblazer, correct?
Yes.
Whereas the film, I think, drops the Hellblazer.
Yeah.
It's just Constantine.
It's just Constantine.
And that name itself reverberates through the centuries. The conversion of Constantine. I mean, a Constantine changed the way we live in significant kinds of ways.
Yes.
We gave each other presents on December 25th, partially thanks to a Constantine. So by just calling this Constantine gives it this sort of serious gravitas that, let's face it, as adults, Constantine the Hellblazer might be a perfectly fine comic. It might do some really interesting graphic stuff, but a title that has the Hellblazer in it immediately puts it in to that territory of generic prejudice, which you and I have been trying to fight against in all of the conversations we've had in this podcast and in real life. But at the same time, that still functions as a way in which we mark the identities of things before we read a word, listen to a note, or see a frame of those things.
And I think that's a big part of why Hellblazer was dropped. It sounded like Hellraiser. There's just too much for a general audience. And again, much like The Crow, I personally think that a good comic book movie is inspired by the comic book, but draws in audiences who were not necessarily comic fans. On that note, when I was at USC in class with Drew Casper, on his auteur class of Steven Spielberg, he assigns The Watchmen as a reading. And the students are required to read Watchmen as he makes an argument for Steven Spielberg's fairy tale adaptations of all stories. So, the way, and that comic book became a movie in 2009. So, I completely agree with you that the comic book has effectively done half the work for you when it comes to planning a film.
The other thing is, and I'm of two minds, three minds, four minds about his performances and various other things, but Keanu gets an extra bonus in this with his sidekick, who doesn't have, not hanging around very long. But Shia LaBeouf's character is some of the best lines are the two of them in their little bit of a buddy movie, which this never quite manages, but As I recall, it's enough of a buddy movie that he visits the grave at the end.
Yep.
But that whole, not bad kid kind of thing could have come out of a Howard Hawks movie in the 1940s.
Absolutely.
And his name's Kramer. Even better still.
Kramer. Chaz Kramer, asshole. What? Oh, this is Kramer. Chaz Kramer, asshole.
Chaz! What? Move the car. What? Move the damn car.
You're absolutely right. They have such a fun dynamic. And coming to our very first question, who is Keanu Reeves in this film and what does he bring to the movie? In this film, he is explicitly a jaded exorcist, right?
That would have been a good title.
The jaded exorcist.
Constantine, the jaded exorcist.
Yeah, he's a jaded exorcist. He is sick of life, but he also knows what happens when he dies. So he's left literally in purgatory, just trying to move between worlds and ideally, as Tilda Swinton, as Gabriel says.
He's still trying to buy your way into heaven?
What about the minions I've sent back? That alone should guarantee my entry.
How many times have I told you? That's not the way this works.
Haven't I served him enough? What does he want from me?
Only the usual. Self-sacrifice. Belief.
I believe for Christ's sake.
No, you know. And there's a difference. You've seen.
I never asked to see. I was born with this curse.
A gift, John.
That is such a fascinating character that is made only more evident by Shia LaBeouf's Chaz eagerness to be a part of this community. The jadedness of Constantine is so evident every time he talks to Chaz.
And he's compared to Tonto and Robin, if I'm not mistaken.
And the fat guy with the skinny friend.
Right, exactly. But first to the first thing you said, which is what I think is most profound about this story, and it's manifest in the comic, but I think this film does a nice job of. And in my usual hyperbole, and I take this with a grain of salt, but there's a certain part of this film that is kind of like it's the sequel to the famous soliloquy that Hamlet gives when he's thinking about whether to kill himself. So the whole thing, to live on or not to, it'd be simple enough to stick a bodkin into myself and make it all end. And wouldn't that be relaxing? But what if we don't just sleep, but we also dream? And what if those dreams are horrible? And what if by ending this life, I go into the undiscovered country that no one's come back to tell about? Well, this movie starts where Keanu Reeves is playing a character in John Constantine who's got a lot of Hamlet qualities. He's kind of morose. He's sort of a guy you probably wouldn't want to hang out much with, who doesn't treat any of his sidekicks very well until he's about to die in the end. Hamlet, that is. And he, of course, has had reports from the undiscovered country. He's been to the undiscovered country. So he is sick of living. He's sick of his job. He's sick of so many things like so many human beings are. But unlike Hamlet, he's got the inside track of what happens. Not only that, but it's no question about whether or not he's getting in. We know his fate. The almost incredibly hopelessness of him continuing to do his job, to show up in that metaphorical cubicle of exorcism every day with the hopes that maybe he can reverse which of the two undiscovered countries that he gets to go to. That is a pretty complex human idea. You can kind of roll your eyes at the Nazi imagery in the beginning with the flag and the Gollum stuff. I mean, they throw a lot of stuff onto the screen. But if you focus on the character of John Constantine, there are some really, really serious questions, I think, going on. And then at the same time, and I'm sorry to be going into lecture mode, but I can't think of anyone more perfectly positioned at this point in time, 2005, than Keanu Reeves to play him. Because we've talked about this tabula rasa where he keeps playing all these people in all these different genres, in all these very different dramaturgical traditions. But he always kind of is who he is. He's always that quintessential Keanu, the Keanu. And here, he is so cool. He's a person of few words, a little more rude maybe than normally here. He's strong. He spends some time in a black coat, which in some scenes he adjusts in a way that is just so Keanu and also so cool. He is a reluctant hero. Oh, where have we seen that before? Like
everywhere.
Practically every movie. And it's 2005. It's time for him to be a Christ figure again, to be a redeemer, which he does kind of as part of his job description. So this is both, I think, so perfect for the oeuvre of Keanu Reeves and a real canny choice on whoever's part, him to take it and whoever to cast it. I don't know the details of that. And your little Keanu Bible doesn't go this far, so we can't turn to that. But it was such a great bit of casting. It's such a great thing for him to be doing at this point in his career. And it asks us those same questions that Hamlet asked us many, many centuries ago.
I find it amusing that perhaps the appreciation of Constantine, the movie, can only come through an immersive embrace of the star that is Keanu Reeves. Because reading the critical responses, they were not good, right? It has 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. The site's consensus states, despite solid production values and an intriguing premise, Constantine lacks the focus of another spiritual shoot-'em-up, The Matrix, right? So if you are unfamiliar with Devil's Advocate, with even Bill and Ted, right? The Bill and Ted, My Own Private Idaho juxtaposition of, jaded, wealthy boy and simpleton stumbling through history. Both of those dots are explicitly connected in Constantine. But if you are only asking to get Neo or expecting Neo, then absolutely you will be let down, because this is not Neo. This is Constantine.
So that's interesting. So what that argues is the auteur theory giveth and it taketh away.
Yes.
Because in some ways it's the auteur theory that allows us to appreciate Constantine. Because I am convinced, having watched this in basically chronological order to all the things that we've been watching, I've become more and more convinced that the best way to consume the works of Keanu Reeves as an actor are in fact in chronological order, that Constantine becomes so much more of a rich experience having watched it after you've seen everything else that he's done before it, that in many ways, and I think we've been slouching toward this conclusion for a long time, that Keanu Reeves has performed this kind of super text, that it is his whole body of work, and that each thing is more interesting when it is seen as part of the whole. Now, that's not how I feel about all the things. I don't think one should read Shakespeare in the order in which it was written, far as we know that order. I don't think reading Scott Fitzgerald in the order that it's written is the best way to do it. But in this particular instance of this particular artist, and I think this particular film is a great example of that kind of auteurist idea of let's go through the body of work, and the body of work continues to evolve and do interesting things. That's the giveth part. The taketh away is the other thing you said, which is that we come to expectations with each of these films that are built by what we've seen before. And of course, what was the massive presence when Constantine comes along was, of course, The Matrix. And you're right. If you do an unsophisticated auteur theory, that's not The Matrix. It's not very good. 46% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Right.
So, as we all know, that auteur theory is a dangerous business. You should have to have a license to practice auteurism.
Yeah, I enjoy it so much. I enjoy this film so much, and I think it's the writing, it's the scenarios, but it's also the way in which Keanu Reeves embodies these scenarios. So we talked a little bit about it last time. The cigarette becomes a character in Hardball, and the cigarette.
That's right. I forgot about that.
The cigarette is a prominent character from the very first scene when he conducts that first exorcism. He walks in and puts the cigarette on the table, indicating this is going to be an easy job. Turns out it is not an easy job, but he still comes back to think that that cigarette will be lit and ready to go. And when it's out, he's upset, right?
Cigarette is stopwatch. That was a beautiful, beautiful scene.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that that is an indication of who he is, in that this is like, I love your line, you know, this sort of exorcism cubicle, going to work, clocking in, clocking out.
Send someone back to hell.
Send him back to hell, smoke my cigarette.
Right.
You know, get back in the cab, the kid takes me where I need to go. If I could talk about a couple other things, just to connect it between seasons, Jimon Hosu is also part of the Fast and Furious family, as well as the composer for this film, Brian Tyler, is also
right.
Fast and Furious. So, you know, if we think about, and we talked about last season, Fast and Furious as a sort of comic superhero world, this is what we have again, except Keanu Reeves doesn't do sequels, and we'll talk about The Matrix and we'll talk about John Wick separately, but he has consistently said that's why he didn't do Speed 2. He doesn't want to do sequels. He doesn't want to get tied down into a specific character, but the love of this absurd, over-the-top, like I said, it doesn't feel like a comic book on its first watching. It's not until you go through it the second time. I feel like all of these dots are really valuable. On that note, I think one of my favorite scenes is in the club, in Hosu's, was it Papa Midnight? Papa Midnight's club, when he goes up to the front door.
2 frogs on a bench.
Two frogs on a bench. No. I'm with the guy you just... John! I'm with him, though. Red in a dress. Of course it was.
That is a great scene, and every scene Shia LaBeouf is in this film is a great scene. Again, he doesn't get many, but he takes advantage of them. My favorite scene, I think...
Chaz Kramer, asshole.
My favorite scene is, okay, so Angela's, and the name there is
Sure.
Angela, really subtle.
Angela and Isabella.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, she's got to go into the tub and submerge or whatever. And there's a scene that comes right out of a Jack Benny routine from the 30s where she goes,
So do I have to take the rest of my clothes off, or can I leave them on?
long pause.
John?
Long pause. And he goes, I'm thinking, which is that old, your money or your money or your wife. I'm thinking, or your life, either one of them. And then another long pause, and he goes, on is fine. So there's this idea that we're getting what looks like it could be a sexy, whatever love scene. He thinks about it, he considers it, and he goes, leave him on.
Yeah. And I think it's also, we had a whole conversation about romantic Keanu and, how Keanu exists within that world. But it's clear that that world, that Keanu does not populate all these other Keanus. So, when Tom Cruise is a leading man, he has a love interest and there is a passionate kiss. In this one, we are again scuttled. There's tension, but there's no love story. And the first time she thinks he's going to kiss her and he doesn't. And then he thinks she's going to kiss him and he doesn't.
Wasn't that beautiful? That's one of the things I like about this film is that it didn't do. If I have learned anything in these past weeks of reviewing all these films, it's how much more I like Keanu Reeves than Tom Cruise. I always liked him more than Tom Cruise, but the distance between those two, because you're right, when you think of a Tom Cruise movie, there's a whole list of things we can think about. And a Keanu Reeves movie is certainly in its genres. It follows its formulas. It's not like he's doing a bunch of little experimental films. Well, not usually, but they are very different kinds of movies. Not only is it dealing with all this Hamlet undiscovered country thing, not only is it dealing with the old kind of a send-up of the sidekick with Chaz Kramer, but it's also got this Bond thing. He's got this guy who gives him all, you know how Bond always gets this, okay, here's your little, your
Cute.
watch that will shoot missiles, and here's your, all these cute contraptions that Bond will get to use.
Bullet shavings from the assassination attempt on the Pope, holy water ampoules from the River Jordan, and, oh, you'll love this, screech beetle from Amityville.
There's an equivalent of that here, only it's potions, and it's like elixirs and lotions and unguents.
It's the bug man who lives behind a bowling alley. That's who Q is.
And not only behind a bowling alley, but whoever the prop person was, or the location master who found this, if it in fact exists, Bowl in primary colors. So comic book. So we're throwing Bond, we're throwing Hamlet, we're throwing Christ. This is and we got the Nazis in there, although that really never manifests itself in any significant sort of way. And it never quite flies off the rails, but it gets on two wheels and comes pretty close to it.
Yeah. So then, we've already talked about some of your favorite scenes, your favorite Keanu moments. What does Keanu bring to this character? I feel like we've touched on it, but yeah, what do you think Keanu brings to this character?
Well, it is. I mean, so much of this is so Keanu. His reluctance, his, finally, okay, I guess I have to be a hero. I mean, we are really so much working in the kind of super character that and I don't mean by superhero powers, but the kind of transcendent character that he's done. And we get that as well. We get the laconic, nothing like James Dean, but worth mentioning in James Dean. Montgomery Clift was another actor that I think kind of dealt in some of this, at least physical territory. But I think also what we're developing here is Keanu as mentor as opposed to mentee.
Yes.
Now, we've seen that a little bit before, but clearly as the chosen Neo, he was being mentored by other people. But in Hardball, obviously, he'd become the camp counselor.
Right.
And here we see that in another direction, but you really don't get the gist of the end of that, I don't think, until the last scene, which most people have never seen because you've got to sit through like 8 minutes of credits before you get to it. And usually those post-credit scenes are kind of funny. Gilderoy Lockhart is crazy in the bookstore at Hogwarts or whatever. This was a really crucial scene.
Yes.
Because in the end, it sums up two very important storylines. I think the most important. Number one, his mentoring this next generation of people, John Constantine as teacher. And secondly, that this whole movie is an anti-smoking movie, right down to the fact that we get a close-up of the warning on the side of a cigarette pack, which that we linger on for what seems like 5 minutes. It's not, but it's a long, lingering close-up. And that final thing, after we've seen who the best boy is, and thanks to this whatever, and all this kind of stuff, we see him at Chaz Kramer's grave.
You did good, Ken.
Laying his Zippo down.
And he lays his Zippo down, and of course, if you've watched that long, you're probably watching close enough to know what that means. But then he puts in what I think is gum.
Yes.
So he's actually now come up with another less dangerous habit. And then Chaz ascends, I presume, to heaven. Isn't that where you go when you have big wings like that? So he becomes an angel. Angela has, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that go on in that little scene. And it almost seems hubristic that they decided that that scene that was going to tell us so much, they were going to wait till, we were going to have to earn it. We were going to sit through the credits. But the anti-smoking thing, he gets the cancer taken out of his lung. It's the
devil takes it out.
Yeah, the devil. And the line is,
I guess there's a plan for all of us. I had to die. Twice. Just to figure that out.
isn't that how many people suffering addictions, you know, they don't want to keep smoking. They know it's not good for them. They keep trying over and over. Constantine has to die twice. And finally, okay, here's the lighter. Here's the gum. I guess I've decided to, the American Lung Association ought to name this their poster movie of all time.
Yeah. I adore Tilda Swinton. I think she has such a presence that comes out in whatever film she's doing. You know, it's just she steals the camera. I won't even say she steals the scene. She steals the camera, and you can't help but stare. And I think she delivers a line. Gabriel, delivers a line that, for me, embodies what Keanu Reeves brings to this. And that line is, it's when he's about to shoot her, she says, or excuse me, him, because it's Gabriel, but, you know, I think, what's his name? Kevin Smith's Gabriel in Dogma, we learn has no genitals. But,
oh, fancy intertextual reference.
Sorry,
there.
I couldn't help myself. So Gabriel says,
End my life. Go on. Be the hand of God. It's your choice. It's always been your choice.
So when we talk about Keanu Reeves as the embodiment of free will, that is very much here. He chose to take his own life. And, you know, Gabriel has so few lines, but sets the stage. We meet Gabriel when when Constantine goes to see the father, and she says to him,
You are going to die young because you smoked 30 cigarettes a day since you were 15. And you're going to go to hell because of the life you took.
That is a profound set of lines.
Absolutely. And so you are left, especially even if you know the comic book, because the comic book has a different context by which Constantine is doomed to hell. So you're left thinking, well, what did he do? Whose life did he take? You think he's a killer, even though he's resurrecting and saving people. Or, excuse me, not resurrecting. He's banishing demons to hell, and he saves this little girl in the very first scene. So how could he have taken a life, right? Like, that is a line that makes you think, that makes you ruminate, like, whose life did he take? So Gabriel is clearly the crux of much of this narrative, as we come to find out at the end. Gabriel is the one who is attempting to bring Mammon to this world. But the delivery of that line, plus the one where she explicitly says, it's always been your choice, it demonstrates that Constantine is living with his own choices, and he's going to die with his own choices. And that embodiment of free will, the rhetoric of choice-making through Bill and Ted to Neo to now, the devil's advocate, free will, right? That's what he brings. I don't think he falls into these epic free will discussions. And I don't think that Constantine is as evident on its face that it's about free will the same way, say, The Matrix is. But he is having this perpetual, subtle exploration with what it means to decide one's own fate, and he's working through each of these in every single role. And I think that that blankness hides a deep profundity that is essential to the character of Constantine.
Okay, I agree with everything you just said about Tilda Swinton, who chews up the scenery whenever she's on, and she's not on that much, like
Right.
Shia LaBeouf, but the supporting characters, even the close to minor characters in this film, are extraordinarily strong. The bench goes deep with them. But you said this doesn't get as much into the kind of detailed philosophical
It's subtext.
whatever
It's not super.
of the Matrix. I would rephrase that in a less charitable way that says it's not as ham-handed about this as the Matrix is. I mean, the Matrix, they give you lectures. I mean, you can almost go to you can see the people writing their chapters in the Matrix and philosophy anthologies, which do exist.
Yes.
This is much more subtle, and I hate to do this again, but I'm getting back to the Hamlet thing, which is that where is free will most extremely expressed? To be or not to be? Do I continue living or do I stop? That's the most radical free will decision any human being can ever make. And this deals with that twice. The life you took might have been your own. And we've got Isabel, who all kinds of complicated reasons why she jumped off that building with the cross on it into the pool.
And Constantine is taking his life as slowly as he can with every single cigarette.
Isn't it interesting how, and I got to think, if Hamlet would have been alive in the 20th century, he'd have been a chain smoker. Everything indicates that he would have been. So this idea of free will, which is so, it's there, it can't be missed, but it is much more subtle than we get in the Gospel according to the Matrix. But there is that idea of really exploring this notion of suicide in two important characters that I think gets us back to that to be or not to be. And in the end, as cliche as that soliloquy has become, that is still the question. That is a big, big question. And in 2005, I think Constantine does a credible job of addressing that.
Let's fast forward 3 years to the day the Earth stood still and talk a little bit about...
Wait, is that when the Earth stood still? I don't remember that.
Talk about how free will is operating in this space, because I think... I'll lead with this one. Who is Keanu Reeves in this film, and what does he bring? In this case, he is a spaceman, right? That's the term that's used in the 1951 version over and over. He's a spaceman. He comes down to Earth. He is born on this Earth and moves through the Earth as a human. But as we see, he doesn't really understand the complexities of mankind. He's been watching and has determined that mankind is killing our planet, which we are. But at the same time, his understanding of what he can do, he has to come to, right? So he's like, I'm here, everything is being predetermined.
This planet is dying. The human race is killing it.
So you've come here to help us?
No, I didn't.
You said you came to save us.
I said I came to save the Earth.
You came to save the Earth. From us. You came to save the Earth. From us.
We can't risk the survival of this planet for the sake of one species.
What are you saying?
If the Earth dies, you die. If you die, the Earth survives. There are only a handful of planets in the cosmos that are capable of supporting complex life.
You can't do this.
This one can't be allowed to perish.
We can change. We could still turn things around.
We've watched, we've waited and hoped that you would change.
Please.
It's reached the tipping point. We have to act.
Please.
We'll undo the damage you've done and give the Earth a chance to begin again.
Don't do this. Please. We could change. We can change.
The decision is made. The process has begun.
I'm going to tell you about it, but there's nothing I can do to save you. And it's not until whatever it is, 70 minutes in, that he starts to realize that there's more to humans than what is easily observable. Although I did not like that note where he's like, oh, what is this? And I'm like, oh, it's Bach. I think it was Bach, not Beethoven. It's like, it's beautiful. I'm like, honestly, you've been observing mankind and you don't know about classical music. Like, that's That's like,
Oh,
that's
you're
what we
right.
have.
That is horrible.
That's what we have.
Okay, I will hate that scene from now on because you're right.
I despise it. I don't care what John Cleese says. That drives me up a wall. It's a plot hole. But, you know, I think that
Although John Cleese's line before that, when he says, "I have so many questions to ask you," that's a pretty good line.
That's a good line. You know, he comes down with this purposeful innocence, right? He doesn't understand this world, and that is what Keanu Reeves brings to this role. Just kind of that blank innocence that fits perfectly well. Having said that, if Constantine is a jaded exorcist, Klaatu is a jaded alien, right? It's like, you guys are killing this place, and there's nothing I can do or say to save you, right? That he has a much more worldly view of what needs to be done to save the millions of species. Supernatural Keanu, I argue, is a jaded Keanu, which is not necessarily something we've seen before. He's usually innocent, hopeful, and an ingenue, right? What is coming, what is just around the corner might be everything. And in this case, he's like, what's around the corner is hell. What's around the corner is death. And so I think Supernatural Keanu demonstrates both an evolution of and a sharp departure from the constructs that we have become, that we have come to associate with Keanu. Okay.
Well, Keanu Reeves' characters have been dress rehearsing jadedness since Bill and Ted.
Yes.
Though they weren't jaded, they were totally, you know, complete innocence.
Happy-go-lucky.
Right. But, you know, from My Own Private Idaho and on, we've seen this. Even Neo had to be brought around. There are scenes in Hardball where he is absolutely, I mean, he's doing this to pay off his gambling debts. To hell with these kids once he's managed to. Now, it ends much more happily than that. And, of course, the jaded exorcist, as you dubbed him in Constantine. What I find interesting about The Day the Earth Stood Still, which blasphemy of blasphemies I liked better than the 1951 thing, which I don't think is nearly the classic that everybody genuflects about. I think this did many more interesting things. But he's from, of course, this advanced civilization where the whole concept of jaded, I don't think even means anything. Jaded is something that we primitives do with our reptile minds and all that kind of thing. He is purely rational, like
Data.
Like Data. You can just say Machiavelli, which it doesn't matter if this doesn't sound good. Here's the facts. Here's what you're doing to the planet. All of that bit about how there is no way of convincing them otherwise. This is what they do. And the idea is that, okay, so we could come down and we could help you to not do this anymore. And since that's not going to happen, we will eliminate you and protect the rest of the rest of the planet. What I found in watching this, you know, we've been talking again about this this clear slate that Keanu pours different genres into and manages to embody all of them. Isn't this almost metaphorically the ultimate tabula rasa?
Yes.
Keanu doesn't even exist. He's DNA. They put him together as an embodiment. And of course, we've got the old Christian stuff. He comes down and ultimately gets encapsulated in what looks an awful lot like a manger to me. When he finally comes alive, he goes,
"This body will take some getting used to."
You got to think Jesus said that at some point. I'm sorry, God said that at some point when he had
embodied Jesus.
Become Jesus. Yeah. And he's in that fetal position in the beginning. There is that almost, you expect Linus and Charlie Brown to come out and start, you know, reading from the Bible sort of thing. So there is all of that stuff going on, but
he's literally born again.
He is literally born again, and he's literally poured into the empty slate of the character he will play, I guess, Klaatu's human form. But what is that human form? It's the DNA of none other than our old friend Keanu Reeves.
Right.
America is run not by a president, completely invisible, not by a vice president, completely invisible, but by the Secretary of Defense, who is named Queen. Regina is her name.
Now please, tell me, why have you come to our planet?
Your planet?
Yes, this is our planet.
No, it is not.
I appreciated Kathy Bates's role in this one because she is the one who explicates the biblical references. It's an arc. What comes next? The flood.
Oh, right.
Just in case you miss those references, they're told to you through the individual who is pushing back, through the military-industrial complex who does not see the value of this individual.
He says he wants to speak to the UN.
History has lessons to teach us about first encounters between civilizations. As a rule, the less advanced civilization is either exterminated or enslaved. I'm thinking of Pizarro and the Incas, Columbus and the Native Americans, and the list goes on. Unfortunately, in this case, the less advanced civilization is us.
I feel like Kathy Bates's role, Regina's role, is literally to hold your hand and walk you through the deep metaphors of this. And unfortunately, I think the way she talks about it, that, the less advanced species is the one that will be destroyed. In that little speech she gives,
comparing to Pizarro and, right?
We realize what we have done, right? Like, I think that this film is asking the audience, the American, largely white, descended from colonizer audience, to see that life is a circle, and eventually we will be held accountable for our ancestors' actions. Both those as colonists and as industrialists. And I liked it. I like this movie because it's preachy, but not too preachy.
When it preaches, I think it's actually okay about its preaching.
Yeah.
I mean, it's framed in such a way that we're willing to let it do that. The Regina, what's her last name? Jackson, which is interesting if I've got that right. Yeah, Jackson, because of course her first name says Queen, her last name evokes a very queenly or kingly president we once had once upon a time. But there's something, and I think watching this now, when this came out in 2008, what other important thing happened in 2008? Oh, I don't know. There was a presidential election that was kind of important. Watching this now.
This is also released after he was elected, December 12th.
Watching this now, there's something so nostalgic. You pointed out that she kind of holds our hand. She lays it out. They're doing an arc, then comes the flood. We did this when we were the more powerful. Now they're the more powerful. This is what's going to happen. The idea of being handheld by a political leader is now nostalgically refreshing. Oh, wouldn't that be nice when we had political leaders that could actually lay stuff out? Now, she is kind of ruthless. I think, lacks a certain vision and imagination, but she is an effective human being. She behaves like a competent human being. My favorite scene in this is when Klaatu goes to talk with the guy who's been on Earth for 70 years. And he talks, of course, in fluent
Mr. Wu.
Chinese.
I love that scene so much. To come back, I'm sorry to interrupt you, to come back to our comments on Fast and Furious, when you watch dialogue with no translations, they have that exact scene. And they are having a deep conversation that is a human language, and you know it to be a human language, but largely, Americans don't speak Chinese. And it just triggered in me. I'm like, something's happening, something important, and I don't understand. And I feel like that is also the metaphor for the film itself. But coming back to you,
now it's interesting that you say that, because I remember that scene as being subtitled. You're telling me that it wasn't.
It wasn't subtitled in mine. In my
Interesting.
DVD.
Which would make sense, because what you're saying would be that we kind of feel like we're understanding it. I may be remembering it as though I understood it Maybe it wasn't. I'll have to go back and look. But anyway, so they had this conversation, whatever.
They are having a conversation on the state of mankind at a McDonald's, and he is drinking a McCafe. And
that's so perfect.
Yeah, it's perfect.
There is this lovely line.
You yourself called them a destructive race.
That's true. But still, there is another side. You see, I love them. This is a very strange thing. I can't find a way to explain it to you. For many years, I cursed my luck for being sent here. Human life is difficult. But as this life is coming to an end, I consider myself lucky to have lived it.
And that is one of the most hopeful, at the same time sad and apocalyptic, which is essentially saying they're irrational, they're stupid, they will do what they goddamn well want to do, and there's no ever convincing them otherwise.
Isn't that
we
the same?
do love them. It's been a great run, and you gotta love what human beings have done. But in the end, they're never gonna learn their lesson.
Aside from the last part, isn't that the same way we treat children, right? That they're going to run around naked, they're going to refuse eating, and it's not going to get any better. Hopefully it will, because eventually they'll learn logic and you can talk them through things. But,
but we love them. But there is the idea
it's paternalistic.
that children will grow up.
Yeah.
Mr. Wu's idea is that no, they're never going to grow up.
Right.
They're constantly going to be running around naked, or whatever the equivalent of that is. And this movie, in the end, and you're going to have to explain this ending to me because I'm a little unclear about it. But in the end, this film supplies some kind of hopeful redemption. But it's not convincing humans to be rational. It's seizing from them the price that must be paid for saving the earth, which doesn't happen through their own volition, but happens through an outside force.
Yeah.
Now, we don't have an outside force currently giving us global warming data. So where are we to expect our happy ending to come from?
I was frustrated with this ending, right? Because the ending of 1951, Klaatu gets on the ship and he says, "Good luck," and walks away. This one, Keanu, in a reluctant savior fashion, sacrifices himself to simply eliminate the world killers.
It's leaving.
No, he's leaving.
That's it, right? And so all these robot flies fall from the sky and everything kind of goes back to normal, aside from the fact that there are swarms of robot flies on the ground. And then to come back to the idea of children and what humans can and cannot see, I'm thoroughly amused at the Jaden Smith being put in here, because the whole thing feels like it's a sequel to Independence Day. And this is literally the son of Will Smith, who was a soldier, and the character of the absent father that Jaden Smith is constantly believing exists is effectively Will Smith in Independence Day. Like, I just feel like those two films have to be seen together.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
But Jaden Smith is a terrible child, right? And he's like, "I hate you." He doesn't actually say, he's like, "Yeah, whatever, I don't really like you," until the one moment when his white mom gets snatched away, and now he's suddenly like, my world could end. This one woman who has been taking care of me, who is, not technically biologically related to me, because I think he's Will Smith's and Vivica A. Fox's son. When she's gone, he realizes his mistake. And in theory, that is what Klaatu needs of mankind. When you realize this is gone, you will try to be better. But that never comes to fruition, and I feel like Klaatu will disappear, and we'll just go back to doing our own thing. On that note, if we read this through the Matrix and the decimation of Zion, there was no plan for these aliens to keep any humans alive. Meanwhile, Zion, you pick whatever it is, 5 men and 9 women to continue on the species. That's not done here. Humans will be gone. And instead of thinking through the ways in which mankind could continue, Klaatu just sacrifices himself and everybody just kind of goes about their day and nothing is learned. And that's why this movie makes me angry, because nothing is learned and we never get better. And somehow Klaatu is okay with us never getting better, even though that was always his argument to begin with.
Unless you just allow the movie to end with Mr. Wu's, they are destructive, they won't change, but I love them. In which case, that's all you can do.
Yeah.
In other words, you have to decide whether you're going to get rid of them or not, but they're going to keep destroying this planet until either they are destroyed or the planet is destroyed. As for that ending, I read that slightly more optimistic. You know, there's that whole big thing about how
it would come at a price to you and your way of life.
But we can change. You know that now. Please. Please, just give us a chance.
I got a sense, and I've read various interpretations that of others who have had this sense, that in the end, while all those flies or bees or whatever they are have gone down. The swarm, perfect, which is very Old Testament.
Yes.
Just be a good Passover movie to watch with 10 Commandments. That the price that was being paid is that somehow Earth wasn't destroyed, but the technological infrastructure was somehow derailed. Electricity, whatever, was taken away. That somehow it brought us back to a certain pastoral Eden garden-like period. You've got to do a little of a stretch to read that way, but that's the sense I got, that he was leaving the planet, but he wasn't leaving it with the capability to do. It's like when your kid crashes the car or drives drunk, you take the car away. You take away the stuff that's going to harm them.
Right. Even if that is not the case, the fact that humans are aware of this awesome extraterrestrial being that can come down and destroy their world might be sufficient enough to activate change, right? Because we see the swarm move out from Virginia and basically destroys the Northeast, right? It gets from Virginia to New York City.
It does
so,
indeed.
Even if it doesn't make it to Europe and Asia and Africa and South America, all of mankind knows that we are effectively being policed. And is that really about changing behavior, or is that just about behaving within the rules so that we don't get caught? And is that really a long-term change? I argue no, because we will go back to whatever we were doing the minute the lens is closed.
As he said, they are destructive and they will not change. What makes anybody think, now that we know someone else could destroy us, that we would change things where we are already destroying ourselves? We've been doing it on our own.
Yeah.
Why are we going to ultimately be afraid that someone comes in and maybe does it a little faster than we did? And that's why I think that line, that they are destructive, they will not change, is the Rosetta Stone to understanding this film. And as each day goes by, I think to understanding humankind, because how many days go by where we don't get a story that indicates that's exactly true? We are destructive and we will not change. We didn't stop fighting wars after the Civil War. We didn't stop fighting wars after World War I. That's why we've got one with the number 2 in it. And we still haven't stopped fighting them now. The climate change thing, which this is a very prescient movie in that respect, because that argument was not nearly as developed when this film came out. It was developed.
I think, when was Al Gore's movie? I think that was 2002 or 2004.
Right. So, no,
or
that's
his
true.
PowerPoint presentation, anyway.
Right. So that was already there, but the pervasiveness of the denial of that.
Yeah.
When Al Gore's movie came out, a lot of people, it was taken seriously by a lot of people. So anyway, yes, this is a depressing movie, but manages to be ambiguous enough at the end that it isn't a bummer that nobody would want to go see.
How do these two films work together to establish Keanu as a public figure? How do they complement each other? How do they confront each other? We've already seen Keanu sacrifice himself in The Matrix, but I feel like it's even more so in these two. We literally see him slit his wrists. We literally see him walk through a deadly storm and be ripped and torn apart in order to save mankind. I think the self-sacrifice narrative is something that we see. Oh, I guess there's also Devil's Advocate. So it clinches the idea that Keanu Reeves will save us from ourselves. And to be honest, that's rarely something we appreciate as mankind.
You know how to become a saint, I'm not sure what the rules are, but you have to like perform a miracle that's verifiable and you have to do whatever kind of things. It's almost like Keanu Reeves is now at the point in his career where a lot of this stuff is gravy. That his overall oeuvre is trying to slouch toward sainthood by now, okay, we did some of the redemption savior type of stuff in The Matrix and Devil's Advocate and stuff. Now let's go full out on Moses, full out on Christ, and and these two films really do that. And you don't have to have been to Hebrew school or Sunday school to catch this. It is right in our faces. It's as he's checking off each of these different characters and each of these different genres that he is, and by this time has gone through a wide range of. He's now moving into these supernatural, in one case a comic book movie, in another case a supernatural kind of movie, to now embody those characters, which of course real life cannot possibly provide us, where you have to go comic book or supernatural to do. I don't know if this is true or not, but one gets the sense every new film or every film that we watch and discuss again, that this is such a beautifully and brilliantly put together program of a career. And it's not that obvious. It gets back to one of the first days when you talked about your colleague who said, how can a bad actor like that be in so many good movies? It isn't obviously programmatic, but the longer we get into his career, the more in focus it becomes.
Absolutely. And I think the way in which, as you already said, he is building a narrative at the same time, doing what he wants to do without having to necessarily cater to the Hollywood machine, becomes part of not just his stardom, but also the characters that he chooses. And next week, we'll talk about Man of Tai Chi, which is his directorial debut, and 47 Ronin, where we see him taking an even greater role in the production, in the decision-making. All of the stuff we've seen before, he's kind of subtly been part of the production, right? I'm going to give money here so we can get this actor. I'm going to give money here so that we can flesh out the virtual effects. Now, he's established, he is a leading man, but he is not a romantic leading man, which is usually where we go to. Mm-hmm. Instead, he is a leading storyteller, and these are the stories he wants to tell. And I don't care if those stories are absurd, are supernatural. Frankly, I don't really care if they're poorly told. I am excited to see what Keanu Reeves thinks is important and what should be part of the pantheon of American cinema.
I agree. And it's interesting with 47 Ronin, as he's beginning to appropriate more and more power within the overall filmmaking process, he chooses a project that is one of the most extraordinary examples of cultural appropriation that I can possibly imagine.
Yeah. I guess for me, what I would like people to talk about with these two films, with Supernatural Keanu as a whole, is Keanu's greater metaphor of mankind, right? That this is the story he wants to tell. He wants to explore how not just his own development, but the way in which the world moves and how we participate in it. If we see him as a philosopher, and again, he's not writing, but he is choosing. If we see him as a philosopher, there is now a philosophy of Keanu Reeves that comes back time and time again that I think deserves its own critical anthology.
I agree. And I think it's more that Keanu Reeves manifests philosophies that are centuries old, in some cases millennia old. He's become the delivery system of a philosophical attitude, of a process of thought in movies that sometimes we would have at least expected that to happen.
So Keanu doesn't do sequels for the most part, but in both of these narratives, there are prequels and sequels that I feel are built in. These stories do not exist no story exists in a vacuum, but I feel like the story didn't really begin and didn't really end, right? So with Constantine, we get these glimpses of a 13-year-old John Constantine, and we hear what Angela and Isabel went through as children, and I would really love to see a prequel to John Constantine, where we see a 13-year-old teenager attempting to come of age in a world where he can see demons. And then...
Wait, didn't J.K. Rowling write that in about 7 volumes?
Yeah. But then there's also, that Netflix 13 Things, right? Where we come to understand
Very interesting, yes.
Suicide. And I think that there's a really rich narrative for tween Constantine.
I agree.
Yeah. And then on the other side...
I would watch that, and I'm no tween.
Yeah. And on the other side, the idea of what is the world post-Klaatu, right? We haven't seen a sequel
that's a really good idea.
To The Day the Earth Stood Still, because in these films, we assume that mankind will change, but as they explicitly said, mankind will never change. So what happens after we have been touched by a extraterrestrial entity that is attempting to keep us in check? Do we keep ourselves in check, or do we collapse? And I think that there's just more movies that I want to see about these worlds. So my question to you is, given the body of work to date, are there other movies that you want to see that are seeded by Keanu Reeves? Is he scuttling our opportunity to explore worlds?
First of all, the post-Klaatu world. I think the realistic, and I love the idea of doing that. Klaatu gets back up to his planet, and he gets fired. We send you down here. We collect this DNA back in 1928. And what do? You kind of fall in love and you get an attachment to this kid and you leave without having solved anything. And then I think they send somebody else down who finishes the job. He builds the ark, he takes the thing, and he sends the flood and be done with it. So Klaatu, in many ways, didn't do his job.
Right.
His performance evaluation is going to be negative when he gets back up to XK12 or wherever he lives. The idea of the prequel, and it's interesting how it's the sequel we want of Day the Earth Stood Still, and it's the prequel we want of Constantine. And we just heard that they're going to make a prequel to Grease, Summer Nights, and all the things they sung about when they met that first time before they get back together in the actual play and movie. We're going to find out about. That is a really interesting idea because so many of the things that are crucial to how that story plays out would have happened in those periods. And as you point out, 13-year-olds are a very interesting age to be dealing with all of this. As for other movies from the oeuvre, I don't know. I'm not all that bright. I'm just looking forward to the third Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
I'll be happy with that.
Yeah, it should be fun. Before we wrap for the day, there have been several stories in the news cycle this past week about members of the Fast and Furious franchise and family. It was announced that John Cena was on board for Fast and Furious 9, scheduled for release in summer 2020, and directed by Justin Lin. Sources also revealed this past weekend that Keanu Reeves will be joining the Fast and Furious family with a teaser at the end of Hobbs and Shaw coming August 2nd, 2019. Bob, you and I have talked about Keanu Reeves fitting in with this family given his body of work, and if I recall, we were discussing plans for season 2. This overlap was part of the conversation. I didn't think it was possible to be more excited for another installment of Fast and Furious franchise than I was with Hobbs and Shaw and the addition of Idris Elba, but here we are. Bob, do you have any thoughts on this new information?
Well, I don't want to flatter myself that we're responsible for this, but I think the desire waves that both of us are sending out for this to happen had to have a little something to do with it actually happening. What could be more? I mean, we've now spent a semester talking about Fast and Furious, a semester talking about Keanu, and now the twain shall meet.
Absolutely.
I can't wait.
Well, I'm looking forward to connecting in August for a conversation about Hobbs and Shaw and adding a 9th episode to our first season, which for our listeners is still available at our website, 2keanus.com, and on your favorite podcasting platform. Next time, we will discuss Koa Keanu with Man of Tai Chi and 47 Ronin, both 2013. Thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to our producer, Lizzie Goldsmith. So on that note, I suppose we will close with Mr. Wu's final quote in his conversation with Klaatu at the McDonald's. "Human life is difficult, but as this life is coming to an end, I consider myself lucky to have lived it."